It was 2019, a year my family wouldn't forget. That Thanksgiving, we decided to invite Justin, our new neighbor, to dinner. Justin seemed like a kind man, quiet, polite, and always ready with a wave. He lived alone in the small house across the street, and my mom thought it would be nice to include him since he didn't appear to have any family nearby. Thanksgiving Day was warm and cozy. The rich aroma of turkey and spices filled our house, mingling with laughter and the soft hum of conversation. Right on time, Justin arrived, holding a small pie he had baked himself. He thanked my mom graciously, stepping inside with a shy smile. At first, he didn't say much, just listened as we shared stories and laughed. He seemed harmless, just a lonely man enjoying the company. But as the evening unfolded, the air grew thick with unease. Justin began mentioning things about us, things we hadn't told him. He commented on my dad's exact work schedule, joked about my brother's habit of leaving his bike in the yard, and even noted the scratch on my mum's car, down to its precise location. It wasn't casual observation, it was far too specific. We laughed awkwardly, brushing it off, though an unsettling tension hung in the room. My mum, ever the gracious host, didn't press him, not wanting to embarrass him. The evening ended without incident. Justin thanked us again for the meal and disappeared into the dark night. But the strangeness didn't stop there. A few days later, as my mum folded laundry in the living room, she glanced out the window and froze. Justin was standing by his window, staring directly at our house. In his hands was a camera, pointed straight at us. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly closed the curtains and called my dad, who was still at work. He tried to reassure her, chalking it up to loneliness, but my mum wasn't convinced. The following week, things escalated. Justin became a constant presence. He lingered on his porch, by the mailbox, always looking toward our house. His once friendly wave now felt ominous, a quiet threat wrapped in a smile. My mom started double-checking the locks every night, and the cheerful warmth of our home was replaced by a creeping dread. Then one stormy night, everything came to a head. My dad was working late and my brother was asleep upstairs. I was staying at a friend's house, leaving my mom alone with our dog Bendy, a small but fiercely loyal beagle. Rain lashed against the windows as thunder growled in the distance. Bendy suddenly sprang up, barking furiously at the front door. His growls were low and menacing, a sound we had rarely heard from him. My mom tried to calm him, thinking it was just the storm, but then she heard footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, crunching against the wet gravel outside. Her stomach tightened as she peeked through the curtains. Justin was standing in the garden, soaked to the bone. His face was partially obscured by the shadows, but his eyes glinted unnervingly in the dim light. In his hand, he held something metallic that caught the faint glow of the porch light. Panicking, my mom grabbed an umbrella and opened the back door cautiously, letting Bendy rush out ahead of her. "Justin!" she called over the pounding rain. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer, his expression cold and unreadable. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Justin didn't respond. Instead, he raised the object in his hand, a notebook. But there was something about the way he held it, something in his posture that screamed danger. Fear overwhelmed her, and she bolted back inside, slamming the door shut. She locked it and leaned against it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Moments later, the knocking started, soft at first, then louder. "Please," Justin's voice called from the other side, eerily calm. "I need your help. Let me in." Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. The knocking stopped abruptly, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the relentless rain. Minutes passed like hours until flashing blue lights illuminated the yard. The police found Justin standing in the garden, silent and unmoving. In his hands was the notebook, its contents chilling. It was filled with detailed notes and sketches of our house, diagrams of our rooms, notes on when lights were turned off, and photos of us in the yard, through the windows, and even of my brother riding his bike. Justin was taken into custody, his drenched figure fading into the flashing lights of the police car. The officers returned a few days later to share what they had uncovered. Justin had been watching us for months, documenting our routines with obsessive precision. While there were no direct threats or concrete plans in his notes, his behavior suggested he had been plotting something. The thought made my blood run cold. He never came back to his house. The police said he was being evaluated, but we didn't ask for details. My mom insisted we install security cameras and new locks, and my dad didn't argue. From that night on, we lived cautiously. Curtains stayed drawn, and doors were always double-locked. The warmth of our home returned, but the shadow of Justin's presence lingered, a reminder of how thin the line is between safety and terror. Thanksgiving night had always been a warm, comforting tradition in our home, a moment to forget the world's chaos and bask in the glow of family and gratitude. But that night, November 28th, became a nightmare etched forever in my memory. The air in Los Angeles was unseasonably cold, and our small home felt like a sanctuary. The scent of roasted turkey and spiced pumpkin pie filled every corner, blending with the soft murmur of laughter and the clinking of glasses. My mom had outdone herself, and even my little brother Max, the pickiest eater in the world, was devouring her stuffing like it was a rare delicacy. Dad was midway through one of his corny jokes, the kind that made us groan more than laugh, when a loud, violent knocking shattered the cozy bubble. It wasn't a polite tap-tap, but a deep, urgent pounding that seemed to rattle the very walls. We all froze. Dad frowned, setting down his fork, and Mom whispered, "Who could that be at this hour?" "I'll get it," Dad muttered, pushing back his chair. Max clung to my side, his wide eyes reflecting the fear I felt growing in my chest. Something about that knock, so forceful, so unrelenting, made the air feel heavy, almost suffocating. When Dad opened the door, the harsh light from our porch revealed a man standing there. He was old, wrapped in a tattered coat that barely seemed to shield him from the chill. His hollow cheeks and sunken eyes gave him a ghostly appearance, and his beard was a wild, scraggly mess. "Please," the man rasped, his voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. "I haven't eaten in days. I don't know where else to go." He looked desperate, pitiful even, and my heart twisted with sympathy. But there was something off about him. His eyes, though tired, flickered with an intensity that made my stomach churn. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those silent glances that only parents understood. Finally, Dad sighed and stepped aside. "Come in," he said reluctantly. The man shuffled inside, his movements stiff and awkward, as if he wasn't used to being around people anymore. He muttered a faint thank you and glanced around, his eyes lingering on the family photos on the walls and the plates of food on the table. Mom quickly set a plate for him, and he hunched over it like a starving animal. His trembling hands shoveled food into his mouth, as if he feared it might vanish if he paused. We tried to resume dinner, but the mood was broken. The air felt heavier, colder, as if his presence had drawn a shadow into our warm little home. I couldn't stop watching him. His jerky movements, the way his eyes darted toward the windows and doors as if expecting something, or someone. Then, far off, the faint wail of a police siren pierced the night. It wasn't unusual in our neighborhood, but the man's reaction was immediate and chilling. His whole body stiffened, the fork halfway to his mouth frozen in midair. His eyes darkened, and the faint smile that had tugged at his lips vanished entirely. "What's wrong?" Mum asked softly, her voice tense. He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly reached into his coat. Time seemed to stop as he pulled out a gun. "Nobody moves," he growled, his voice no longer frail but sharp and commanding. My blood turned to ice, the room plunged into silence, the kind that roars in your ears. Dad raised his hands slowly, his calm voice betraying the fear I knew he felt. "Look, we don't want any trouble," he said. "Quiet!" the man barked, his finger twitching on the trigger. Mum squeezed my hand under the table, her trembling mirroring my own. Max wasn't at the table anymore. He'd slipped away to the bathroom just before the man pulled the gun. My heart pounded in terror for him, hoping he'd stay hidden. The siren grew louder, closer. The man's agitation grew with it. His wild eyes darted toward the door, his grip on the gun tightening. Then a soft creak came from the hallway. My breath caught. "Max!" The man's head snapped toward the sound, his face twisting in fury. Before he could move, a faint click echoed from the front door. In a flash, the man bolted toward the sound, yelling, "No!" He flung the door open, only to come face to face with two police officers, their guns drawn and aimed. "Drop it!" one of them shouted. The man froze, his face contorted with indecision. For a moment I thought he might fire, but the officers didn't wait. They lunged forward, wrestling him to the ground. The gun clattered to the floor, and the man let out a guttural scream as they cuffed him. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until the sound of the gun hitting the floor snapped me back to reality. Max peeked out from the hallway, pale but determined. One of the officers noticed him and nodded. "Good job, kid." As the man was hauled away, we learned the chilling truth. "This guy's been targeting families on Thanksgiving," one officer said grimly. "He's already robbed a few homes tonight, holding them at gunpoint. You're lucky he didn't hurt anyone." I wrapped my arm around Max, who was clinging to Mum. "You're a hero," I whispered. And for once, he didn't argue. That night, we didn't return to the table. The untouched leftovers sat cold and forgotten as we huddled in the living room, the warmth of our home replaced by an unshakable chill. We were safe. But the shadow that man brought with him, it lingered long after he was gone. Thanksgiving has always been my favorite time of year. It was when our family came together in our old farmhouse, a place that seemed frozen in time. Nestled among acres of fields and bordered by dense woods, the house was a relic of the past, passed down through generations. My grandparents once called it home, and after their passing, it became my father's. Each year we'd gather there, the laughter of loved ones filling the air. But last Thanksgiving, something happened. Something I still can't explain. The day began as it always did. My parents, my younger brother Jason, my uncle Frank and I arrived around noon. The farmhouse stood as it always had, a sturdy but aging structure, its wooden floors creaking underfoot and the faint smell of old wood permeating the air. It was comforting and nostalgic. But that day, the house felt different. The early hours passed uneventfully. My mom and Uncle Frank worked together in the kitchen, while Jason and I ran around outside. The cold November air bit at our skin as we played catch in the field behind the house. I remember looking up at the farmhouse, its windows glowing with the soft light of the setting sun. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something move in one of the upstairs windows. Just a flicker. I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing, probably just the curtain swaying or the shadow of a tree. As evening fell, we gathered around the dining table for the Thanksgiving meal. The room was warm, lit by the chandelier that flickered occasionally, adding to the old-world charm. We ate, laughed, and shared stories of holidays gone by, but as the night wore on, something felt off. The air in the house had grown heavier. It wasn't cold exactly, but there was a chill creeping up from the floorboards, like something unseen was watching us. I noticed Jason glancing toward the hallway, his gaze often fixed on the stairs. When I asked if he was okay, he shrugged and muttered something about hearing creaks. After dinner, we retreated to the living room to watch a movie. My dad lit the old stone fireplace, and the flames flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. It was cozy, but that uneasy feeling never left. The creaks Jason mentioned earlier became more noticeable, soft, rhythmic sounds like footsteps coming from the second floor. "Probably just the house settling," Uncle Frank said when I pointed it out. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Around 10 p.m., Jason and I headed upstairs to the room we always shared when we visited. It was a simple room, 2 twin beds and a small window overlooking the backyard. The moonlight bathed the room in a pale glow, casting long shadows on the floor. We got ready for bed, but Jason was unusually quiet. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think there's someone in the house?" I laughed nervously. "What are you talking about?" "I thought I saw someone standing by the barn earlier, but when I looked again, they were gone." I didn't want to scare him or myself, so I brushed it off. "Probably just your imagination. Let's get some sleep." But sleep wouldn't come. The wind howled outside, and the old farmhouse groaned with age. But tonight, it was different. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud thump, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy falling upstairs. Jason was already sitting up in bed, wide-eyed. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Stay here, I'll go check." Grabbing my phone, I switched on the flashlight. The hallway outside our room was dark and silent, but the oppressive feeling had returned. I crept toward the stairs leading to the attic where the sound had come from. The attic door was ajar, swaying gently as though it had just been opened. I called out, my voice trembling. "Hello?" No answer, just the wind whistling outside and the faint creak of the attic door. I climbed the narrow staircase slowly, each step groaning under my weight. When I reached the top, I pushed the door open wider and peered inside. The attic was cluttered with forgotten belongings, old furniture, and piles of dusty blankets. Everything was still, but the air felt wrong. Thick. Oppressive. That's when I saw it. In the far corner, near an old rocking chair, a shadowy figure stood. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me. But then, it moved. Not like a person. It glided across the floor, unnaturally smooth. It was tall, featureless, just a dark silhouette against the dim light filtering through the small attic window. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, unable to move, my legs heavy with dread. The figure stopped, then turned toward me. I couldn't see its face, but I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like I was being pulled into a black void. My heart raced and my limbs refused to obey. Then, without warning, it darted toward me. It made no sound, but its sudden movement snapped me out of my paralysis. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping over my feet. Jason was waiting at the bottom, his face pale. "What happened? What did you see? Just go downstairs," I yelled, pushing him toward the living room. By the time we reached the living room, the rest of the family was awake, alarmed by the noise. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but I could tell they didn't believe me. My dad and Uncle Frank went to check the attic, but they found nothing. No shadowy figure. No sign anyone had been up there. We stayed in the living room for the rest of the night, too scared to go back upstairs. I didn't sleep at all. Every creak, every gust of wind made my heart race. The next morning, we left earlier than usual. As we drove away, I glanced back at the farmhouse. For a moment, I thought I saw something or someone standing in the upstairs window, watching us leave. I haven't been back since that night, and I don't think I ever will. Whatever I saw in that attic, it wasn't human. The thought of it still gives me chills. Thanksgiving will never feel the same again.